I mean, the writer of Hebrews in chapter 5, I mean, he writes about, Jesus as our high priest after the order of Melchizedek and not after the order of Aaron, and he says to him, he says, we have so many things that we want to say to you about this. He says, but it's hard to be put into words, seeing you become dull of hearing. The Greek word is talking about someone that is unwilling to listen. I mean, and this goes back to Mark chapter 4, was it 23, 20 and 24, where he says, you that have ears to hear, take heed to what you hear. Pay attention to what you hear. Take heed to what you hear. For the measure you use, what, to hear, it should be measured back to you. And he, and more ability to hear and understand shall be given to you. This is what the writer of Hebrews is saying. Read it. He says, but you that have not, what? A willingness to hear, a willingness to listen and pay attention. He says, even what you may have known should be taken from you. And this is what the writer of Hebrews is getting at. He says, only because of time you ought to be teachers, because he says in verse 11, he says, you've become dull of hearing. Become. Some translations have taken become out of there. But he goes on down, he says, in verse 12, I think he says, only because of time you ought to be teachers. You have need that one teach you again, which be the chief or the first principles of the oracles, the sayings and teachings of God, and are of need of milk and not solid food, for solid food belongs to those who are of full age. For he who partakes of milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness. He says, but solid food belongs to those who are of full age, who by reason of use have their senses trained to discern between good and evil. And this is what the gifts of the Spirit are for. This is what Paul is describing in 1 Corinthians 13. As babes, we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when that which is of full age has come, because the Greek word translated perfect there is the same one. He translates full age in Hebrews 5:14. As a babe, we see through a glass darkly, but then, when we're